Sit in the back, her real father is here. I did not feel it right away. That is the strange thing about moments that change everything. They do not explode. They settle. Quietly. Like dust in a room you thought was clean. For a second, I just stood there, holding the folding chair in my hand, waiting for something to correct itself. A laugh. A glance. Anything that said it came out wrong. But nothing did. Melissa did not look at me. Not once. Her hand stayed on his arm like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. And the people around them, they adjusted. Subtle. Polite. The way people do when they decide, without saying it, who matters in a room and who does not. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 39 years old, and I have spent the last 12 years building a life that, up until 5 seconds ago, I thought was mine. I moved to the back like she asked. Not because I agreed. Not because I accepted it. But because something in me needed to see the rest of it clearly. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor as I set it down. I sat. Hands on my knees. Back straight. Breathing steady. From there, everything looked organized. Melissa smiling. Ryan stepping in easily, shaking hands, laughing like he had been part of this story all along. And Sophie, she stood between them, her smile careful, like she was trying to make everyone comfortable without knowing how. I watched her for a second longer than I should have. Because there was a time when she did not hesitate. When she would run straight toward me, grab my hand, call me dad without thinking about it. That version of her did not ask questions. This one did. And that difference, that is what stayed with me. People think betrayal is loud. That it comes with arguments, slammed doors, long speeches about what went wrong. But it does not. Not the kind that matters. The real kind, is quiet. It is a sentence said in the right tone, in the right room, at the right moment. It is watching everyone else accept it faster than you can process it. It is realizing you are not being pushed out, you were already replaced. You just did not know it yet. I did not interrupt. I did not correct her. Because standing there, in that moment, I understood something I should have seen a long time ago. If someone can erase you with one sentence, then they have been rewriting your role for a while. I stayed until the end. Not out of obligation. Not out of hope. But because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt. The sounds. The looks. The way she did not even check if I was still there. And when it was over, when the applause faded and people started moving again, I stood up the same way I sat down. Quiet. Measured. Invisible. Except this time, it was not confusion holding me still. It was clarity. Because whatever I thought I was walking back to, was already gone. The applause came and went like background noise, polite, automatic, the kind people give when they are not really paying attention. I stayed seated until most of the chairs around me scraped back and the crowd began to thin out, not because I felt stuck, but because I wanted to see how it ended without me. Melissa never looked in my direction, not once, even as she laughed with the other parents, even as Ryan stood there shaking hands like he had just stepped into a role that had always been waiting for him. Sophie lingered near them, her shoulders slightly tense, her smile careful, like she was trying to hold two versions of her life together at the same time. I stood up only when it felt natural, not rushed, not delayed, just precise, like every movement mattered now in a way it never had before. The gym smelled faintly of varnish and warm air, the kind that sticks to your clothes and follows you out into the parking lot. Outside, the late afternoon sun sat low, casting long shadows across the rows of cars. I walked to my truck, unlocked it, and sat there for a moment without starting the engine. The silence inside felt different than before. Not empty. Clear. That was the word. Clear. Like something had been stripped away, leaving only what was real. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder. Melissa's name lit up the screen. I did not pick it up right away. I let it ring until it stopped, watched the screen go dark, then light up again with a message instead. Where did you go? Simple. Casual. Like nothing had happened. Like I had just stepped out to take a call. I stared at those words for a few seconds, then set the phone face down. Because the question was not where I went. The question was when I had already left. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and drove home the same way I had driven 1,000 times before, except this time I noticed things I used to ignore. The cracks in the pavement near the corner. The flicker in the streetlight that never got fixed. The mailbox leaning slightly to the right at the end of our driveway. Small details. Things you only see when you are no longer rushing to belong somewhere. The house came into view just like always. 2 stories. Clean siding. The kind of place people call stable without thinking twice. I parked in the driveway and sat there for another moment, looking at it not as a home, but as something else entirely. An asset. A structure. A set of walls built on decisions I had made years ago when everything still felt shared. I stepped out, walked up to the front door, and unlocked it. Inside, the air was still. Quiet in a way that felt honest. No voices. No performance. Just space. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter and looked around, taking in the details I had stopped seeing. The framed photos. The furniture we picked together. The life that looked complete from the outside. I reached into the drawer by the fridge, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the table. It had been there for years, untouched, almost forgotten, except I never really forgot. I just never needed it. Not until now. I opened it slowly, flipping through the pages without hesitation. Names. Signatures. Dates. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. I exhaled once, steady, controlled, then reached for my phone again. This time, I did not hesitate. I dialed a number I had not called in a long time. When the line picked up, I spoke calmly, like I had been preparing for this moment longer than I realized. I said I was ready to move forward. No explanations. No emotion. Just a decision. And on the other end, the response came just as steady. Understood. We can have everything in motion by this evening. I looked around the kitchen one more time, not with regret, not with anger, but with clarity. Because for the first time, I was not reacting to what had been taken from me. I was choosing what would happen next. I ended the call and set the phone down gently, like it mattered where it landed, like small things still deserved precision even when everything else had shifted. The house stayed quiet, holding its shape around me, but it no longer felt like something I belonged to. It felt like something I controlled. There is a difference, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I walked into the living room and paused in front of the photo wall, the one Melissa insisted on building over the years. Vacations, birthdays, school plays, the kind of curated memories that tell a clean story if you do not look too closely. My eyes stopped on one frame. Sophie at 8 years old, missing her front tooth, holding a science fair ribbon like it was a medal. I remembered that night clearly. She had stayed up past 9, nervous, asking me to quiz her over and over again until she got every answer right. I was the one who drove her there at 6 in the morning, half asleep, coffee in hand, telling her she would do just fine. She called me Dad that day. No hesitation. No confusion. Just simple truth. I reached up, adjusted the frame slightly so it sat straight, then let my hand fall back to my side. Memory is a strange thing. It does not argue. It does not defend. It just sits there, waiting for you to decide what it means. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a call. 3 messages in a row. Melissa. You left without saying anything. Sophie noticed. We need to talk when you get back. I read them once, then locked the screen. The words did not pull at me the way they used to. No urgency. No need to explain myself. Because explanations only matter when both people are still playing the same game. And we were not. I walked upstairs, slow, steady, taking each step like I was mapping the place for the first time. Our bedroom door was slightly open. Inside, everything was exactly where it had always been. Her side of the closet organized by color. Shoes lined up with a precision she never applied to anything else. My side, simpler. Functional. I opened the closet, reached to the back, and pulled down a small lockbox from the top shelf. It was heavier than it looked. Not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. I set it on the bed, opened it, and flipped through the contents without hesitation. Deeds. Contracts. Copies of agreements signed years ago when things were still calm, when trust was assumed, not tested. I remembered the day I insisted on structuring everything the way I did. Melissa laughed back then, said I was overthinking it, said marriage did not need paperwork like that. I agreed with her at the time, at least out loud. But I signed anyway. Quietly. Carefully. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Something my father taught me a long time ago. You do not prepare for the moment everything breaks. You prepare for the moment you finally see it clearly. I closed the box, carried it downstairs, and set it beside the folder on the kitchen table. The late afternoon light shifted across the floor, stretching longer, softer, like the day itself was winding down towards something final. Another message came through. This time from an unknown number. Short. Direct. Listing is live. We already have interest. I read it once, then replied with a single word. Proceed. No hesitation. No second thought. Because by the time people realize what they have done, the decision has already been made somewhere else, long before the consequences show up at their door. I stepped outside onto the back patio, letting the air settle around me. The grill sat where I left it last weekend. The yard trimmed, neat, maintained like nothing had changed. But everything had. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Not in a way anyone passing by would notice. Just beneath the surface. The kind of change that does not ask for permission. The kind that does not reverse. And as the sun dipped lower, casting the house in a soft, fading light, I understood something with complete certainty. By the time Melissa walked back through that front door, this place would know. Longer be hers to come back to. The evening settled in slowly, the kind of quiet transition most people never notice until it is already dark. I stayed on the patio a little longer than usual, not because I was waiting for anything, but because I wanted to feel the shift completely. The air cooled by a few degrees, the sky fading from gold to a deeper blue, and for the first time in a long while, there was no pressure to go back inside and play a role. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Melissa. I watched it ring for a second before answering, not out of hesitation, but because timing matters. Daniel, where are you? Her voice came through sharp at first, then softened, like she realized she needed a different tone. I could hear movement behind her, car doors, distant voices, the kind of background noise that comes after an event ends. At home, I said, calm, steady, the same way I would have answered any other day. There was a pause on the line, short but noticeable. You just left, she said, like it was an accusation wrapped in confusion. You did not say anything. I leaned back in the chair, looking out at the yard, the fence line, the trees beyond it. You seemed occupied, I replied. No edge. No emotion. Just a statement. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel, do not do this, she said, her voice tightening slightly. It was just a moment. You are overreacting. That word hung there. Overreacting. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. People always call it an overreaction when they do not want to look at the cause. I am not reacting, I said quietly. I am deciding. Silence. The kind that does not break easily. I could almost picture her expression on the other end, the slight shift in her posture, the way she recalculates when things do not go the way she expects. "What does that mean?" she asked, slower now, more careful. I did not answer right away. I let the space sit between us, because sometimes the absence of an answer says more than anything else. "It means we will talk when you get here," I said finally. "Not over the phone." She exhaled, a controlled breath, like she was holding something back. "We will be there in 20 minutes, she said, and then the line went dead. No goodbye. No softness. Just an ending. I set the phone down on the table beside me and stood up, brushing a hand lightly against the back of the chair as I walked inside. The house greeted me the same way it always had. Quiet. Familiar. But now it felt like a space waiting for something to conclude, not continue. I moved through the rooms without rushing, turning on a few lights, not because I needed them, but because clarity deserves visibility. The kitchen table still held the folder and the lockbox, exactly where I left them. I pulled out a chair and sat down, opening the folder once more, reviewing everything with the same calm focus. Dates aligned. Signatures intact. Ownership clear. There was no confusion here. No gray area. Just facts. That was the part most people underestimate. They think decisions are emotional. That they happen in bursts of anger or pain. But the real ones, the ones that change everything, are quiet. Structured. Already finished before anyone else realizes they started. Outside, headlights swept across the front windows, briefly lighting up the room before fading again. Tires rolled onto the driveway. Doors closed. Voices approached. I closed the folder, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked toward the front door as the handle turned. Not tense. Not anxious. Just ready. Because whatever conversation was about to happen, the outcome was no longer in question. The door opened without hesitation, like she still believed nothing had changed, like this was just another night she could walk into and take control of. Melissa stepped in first, heels clicking against the floor, her expression already set somewhere between irritation and confidence. Sophie followed a step behind, quieter, her eyes scanning the room in a way that told me she felt something was different, even if she could not explain it. Ryan did not come inside. I noticed that immediately. He stayed outside, visible through the glass for a moment before stepping back, like even he understood there was a line he should not cross. Melissa closed the door behind her and turned toward me, arms folding naturally, like this was a conversation she had already prepared for. "What is this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely toward the table, the folder, the lockbox, the lights that were all turned on like a stage set for something final. I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch just enough to shift the weight of the room. Sophie moved slightly to the side, placing her bag down near the stairs, her attention moving between us, careful, uncertain. "You embarrassed me today," Melissa continued, her tone sharpening, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Walking out like that, not saying a word, leaving people asking questions. Do you have any idea how that looked?" I looked at her, really looked this time, not as a husband trying to fix something, but as someone observing a situation already decided. "I do," I said calmly. It looked exactly like it was. Her expression tightened, just for a second. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to confusion. "Do not twist this," she said quickly. "You are making a big deal out of something that was not meant the way you are taking it." That was the part that always comes next. Rewriting the moment. Adjusting the meaning. Making the other person question what they heard. I leaned back slightly in my chair, hands still resting on the table. "You told me to sit in the back," I said. "You introduced another man as her real father." I did not raise my voice. I did not emphasize the words. I just placed them there, simple, unaltered. Sophie's head lowered slightly at that, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Melissa exhaled, slower now, shifting tone again. It was just a figure of speech, she said. You know that. Ryan is her biological father. That is a fact. It does not erase what you have done. There it was. The justification. Clean. Logical. Almost convincing if you ignored everything around it. I nodded once, not agreeing, just acknowledging that I heard her. Facts matter, I said quietly. That is exactly why we are here. Her eyes flicked toward the folder on the table, then back to me. A small movement, but enough. What are you talking about? She asked, slower now. Cautious. I reached forward, opened the folder, and turned it toward her, sliding it across the table with a controlled, deliberate motion. I am talking about ownership, I said. Structure. Decisions that were made a long time ago. She did not move right away. Just looked at the papers like they might explain themselves without her having to touch them. Sophie took a small step closer, her curiosity pulling her forward despite the tension. Daniel, what is this? Melissa asked, her voice no longer sharp, but not soft either. Something in between. Something uncertain. I met her eyes, steady, calm. This house, I said, is not what you think it is. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not like a pause in an argument. Like the moment before something irreversible becomes real. Because up until now, everything had been words. Interpretations. Emotions. But what sat on that table, that was something else entirely. And for the first time since she walked in, Melissa did not have a response ready. Melissa finally reached for the folder, her movement slower now, more deliberate, like she understood that whatever was inside carried weight she could not dismiss with a quick explanation. She flipped the first page, her eyes scanning the lines, then the next, and the next. I watched the shift happen in real time. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just a subtle tightening around her eyes, a pause between breaths that lasted a second too long. This does not mean anything, she said at first, almost automatically, like a reflex she had used before. But her voice lacked conviction. It was thinner, less certain. I did not interrupt. I let her keep reading. Let the details do what they were designed to do. Sophie stepped closer to the table, her gaze moving between her mother and the documents, trying to piece together something she had never been shown. Mom, she asked softly, but Melissa did not answer. She turned another page, then another, until she reached the section that mattered most. The part that had been signed years ago. Quietly. Carefully. Without fanfare. Her hand stopped there. This says the property is held under a trust, she said. Slowly, reading the words out loud like hearing them might change them. A blind trust. Sole control, her voice trailed off as she reached the name. Mine. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table, not to assert pressure, but to close the distance just enough for clarity. It was set up before we moved in, I said. Before the renovations. Before everything looked the way it does now. She looked up at me then, really looked this time, not as someone she could redirect, but as someone she had underestimated. Why? She asked, the word coming out quieter than anything she had said since she walked in. Not accusatory. Not defensive. Just, searching. I held her gaze for a moment before answering. Because structure matters, I said. Because I do not build things I cannot protect. Sophie shifted beside her, her expression tightening, confusion mixing with something else, something closer to realization. What does that mean? She asked, her voice small but steady. I turned slightly toward her, my tone unchanged. It means this house is not jointly owned, I said. It means decisions about it do not require agreement. They require execution. Melissa's hand dropped from the page, the paper settling back onto the table with a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have been. You are saying I have no claim here, she asked, and this time there was something sharper in her voice. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. I did not rush the answer. I let the silence sit for just a moment, long enough for the weight of the question to settle. I am saying the structure was never what you assumed it was, I replied. And assumptions do not hold up when facts are written down. Her lips parted slightly like she was about to argue, to push back, to find a way to reframe it. But nothing came out. Because there are moments when language runs out, when there is no angle left to take. Sophie looked between us again, her breathing a little quicker now, her posture shifting like she was trying to find ground that felt stable. So, what happens now? She asked. That question hung in the air longer than the others. Not because it was complicated. But because it was simple. Final. I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. The listing page was open. Photos. Details. Status. Active. Melissa's eyes moved to it slowly, then snapped back to me. You did not, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze without hesitation. I did, I said. A few hours ago. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically. Just in the way everything inside it had shifted. The walls, the furniture, the air itself, none of it carried the same meaning anymore. Melissa stared at the screen, then back at the papers, then at me, like she was trying to find the version of reality that made sense. But there was not one. Because the moment she spoke those words earlier, something had already ended. And what she was seeing now, was what came after. Melissa took a step back from the table, like distance might give her a different perspective, like moving a few feet away could somehow make the words on those pages less real. Her eyes moved around the room, landing on familiar things, the kitchen island, the cabinets, the photos on the wall, as if she was trying to reconnect them to something she still controlled. You cannot just do this, she said, her voice rising slightly, the first real crack in her composure. This is our home. We built this together. I remained seated, my posture unchanged, my hands still resting lightly on the table. We lived here together, I corrected quietly. That is not the same thing. The distinction landed harder than anything else I had said so far. Not louder. Just sharper. Sophie looked between us again, her brows pulling together, her voice hesitant but present. Dad, is this really happening? She asked. The word felt different coming from her now. Not automatic. Not certain. But still there. I turned my head slightly toward her, my expression steady. Yes, I said. It is. Melissa let out a short breath, shaking her head like she was rejecting the entire situation outright. This is insane, she said. You are making a permanent decision based on one misunderstanding. I did not respond immediately. I gave her the space to hear her own words, to let them settle in the same air as everything else that had been said tonight. It was not one moment, I said finally. It was the moment everything became clear. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching for something to push against, something she could still control. You are punishing us, she said. Over pride. Over ego. I almost nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition of the pattern. That shift from explanation to accusation. From justification to blame. It was familiar. Predictable. This is not punishment, I replied. This is alignment. She stared at me, the word clearly not landing the way she expected. Alignment with what? She asked, her voice tighter now, frustration rising. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the movement small but deliberate. With reality, I said. With what you said. With what you showed. Sophie stepped closer to the table, her hands now resting on the edge, grounding herself. But you have always been here, she said, looking at me directly now. You have always been my dad. The sentence hung in the air, fragile, uncertain, but real. Melissa turned toward her quickly, like she needed to intercept it. Sophie, do not, she started, but stopped when Sophie did not look away from me. That was the moment everything shifted again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a subtle realignment of where things stood. I met Sophie's gaze, holding it steady, not forcing anything, not asking for anything. I have always shown up, I said. That part does not change. Melissa let out another breath, sharper this time, her patience thinning. So what, you are just going to sell the house and walk away, she asked. That is your solution. I did not hesitate. The house is already in process, I said. Walking away is not the part you should be focused on. Her eyes widened slightly at that, the reality of timing settling in. What does that even mean? She asked. I reached for the folder again, not to prove anything further, but to close it. To signal that part of the conversation was finished. It means this conversation is not about convincing you, I said. It is about informing you. The words were calm. Measured. Final. The kind that do not invite negotiation. Melissa stood there for a second longer, her mind clearly moving, calculating, trying to find an angle that still worked. But there was not one. Because the structure she thought she was standing on, was never actually hers. And now, for the first time, she was standing on something that did not move when she pushed against it. And that was the part she did not know how to handle. Melissa's composure did not break all at once. It slipped. Gradually. First in her posture, the way her shoulders dropped just slightly, then in her eyes, the certainty fading into something more unsettled. She looked around the room again, but this time it was different. Not searching for control. Searching for confirmation. For something that told her this was still reversible. It was not. Daniel, listen to me, she said, stepping closer to the table, her tone shifting again, softer now, controlled but urgent. We can fix this. Whatever you think happened today, it is not what you think. You are taking it too far. I remained still, letting her words pass without interruption, without reaction. Because there was nothing in them I had not already considered hours ago. I am not taking anything, I said calmly. I am finishing it. That stopped her. Completely. Not because the words were loud, but because they left no space for interpretation. Sophie's breath caught slightly beside her, her fingers gripping the edge of the table a little tighter. But, this is our house, she said again, her voice quieter now, less certain than before. All of our things are here. My room is here. I turned toward her, my expression unchanged, but my tone softened just enough to match the weight of what she was saying. A house holds things, I said. It does not define them. She looked down for a moment, processing that, trying to reconcile it with everything she had always believed. Melissa stepped in again, faster this time, like she could not let the silence grow any further. You are not thinking clearly, she said. You are emotional. This is not you. I almost smiled at that. Not out of humor, but recognition. That last attempt to reframe everything as temporary. As something that could still be undone if named correctly. This is exactly me, I replied. You just have not seen it before. Her jaw tightened, her patience thinning, but there was something else underneath it now. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to urgency. Then stop this, she said, her voice dropping lower, more direct. Call whoever you called. Take the listing down. We will talk about everything tonight. We will work it out. The offer hung there, structured, controlled, almost reasonable. If it had come hours earlier, maybe it would have meant something different. But timing matters. And she was too late. I shook my head once, slow, final. It is already moving, I said. There are people scheduled to see it tomorrow. Her eyes widened slightly, the reality closing in faster than she expected. Tomorrow, she repeated, like the word itself did not make sense. I nodded. Yes. Sophie looked between us again, her voice small but steady. So we have to leave, she asked. That question settled into the room heavier than anything else so far. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. I met her eyes again, holding them for a moment. You will have time to gather your things, I said. Nothing is being taken from you. But this place is no longer where things continue. Melissa stepped back again, her hand brushing against the back of a chair as if she needed something solid to hold on to. You cannot do this to us, she said, and this time there was no edge, no control, just disbelief. I did not respond right away. I let the silence answer for me, because sometimes that is the only response left. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the windows again, briefly lighting the room before fading into the distance. The house stood the same as it always had. Walls. Floors. Structure. But the meaning inside it had already shifted. Completely. And as Melissa stood there, trying to find something that still worked the way it used to, the truth settled in quietly around her. This was not a discussion anymore. It was a conclusion already in motion. And nothing she said now would stop what was coming next. The house did not look different from the outside. Same lights. Same structure. Same quiet street stretching out under a steady night sky. But meaning does not live in walls. It lives in what people choose to protect, and what they decide to replace. Melissa stood near the center of the room, not speaking anymore, not arguing, just processing. That was the part no one prepares for. The moment after the words run out. Sophie stayed close to the table, her fingers resting lightly on the edge like she needed something stable, something that did not shift when everything else did. She looked at me once more, longer this time, like she was trying to hold on to something that still made sense. You are really leaving, she said quietly. Not a question. Just a realization catching up to her. I held her gaze, steady, without forcing anything into it. I am not leaving what matters, I said. I am leaving what does not. She nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but enough to feel the weight of it. Melissa finally moved, just a step, her voice lower than before, almost unfamiliar. You could have talked to me, she said. Before all of this. I did not answer right away. Not because I did not have one. Because some answers do not change anything anymore. I did, I said after a moment. Just not in ways you were listening for. That landed differently. Not sharp. Not defensive. Just, final. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding across the windows before fading into the dark again. The house stayed still, holding everything it had always held. Memories. Conversations. Versions of us that existed when things were still aligned. But alignment is not permanent. It shifts. Quietly. Until one day, you either adjust, or you step out of it completely. I walked to the door and opened it, the cool night air moving in without resistance. I did not rush them. I did not tell them to go. I just stood there, making space for what came next. Sophie picked up her bag slowly, her movements deliberate, like she was trying to carry more than just what was in it. She paused for a second near the doorway, then stepped forward without looking back. Melissa followed, slower, her eyes moving around the room. One last time, not with ownership anymore, but with something closer to understanding. And as they crossed that threshold, something settled into place with a quiet certainty. Not anger. Not relief. Just completion. Because the truth is, a house can hold 1,000 moments and still lose its meaning in one. And when that happens, you do not fight to keep it the same. You let it go, before someone else decides what it is worth. I did not raise my voice. I did not stop them. I just stood there, calm, steady, and let the door remain open behind them. Because by the time someone realizes what they had, the person who built it has already moved on.